Sometimes, after certain things happen, it is no longer possible to speak the way we did before. It is no longer possible to pretend that everything is still under discussion, that something might change, that everything's far from being certain. It is no longer possible to comfort ourselves with phrases like, "let's wait, maybe it will pass on its own," or "what if this is just a mistake?" Recently, a video address by Dr. Egon Cholakian was released. And if you watched it attentively, you understood one simple but heavy truth. One of the key chances that allowed humanity to count on a safe future has already been lost. What is this about? About a center of climatic danger, a region that is heating up faster and more intensely than any other point on the planet. Beneath Siberia lies a gigantic magma plume. In scale, it is comparable to the entire Australian continent, and it will not disappear on its own or miraculously dissolve. It is becoming more active because more and more additional energy is entering the Earth's interior, which, in fact, heats the core and provokes magma ascent. And if nothing is done, the pressure inside will only continue to rise. And when pressure increases uncontrollably, this results in an explosion. Not only Russia will be under threat, the destruction will affect the entire world. This catastrophe will trigger a chain reaction of events that will make life on Earth impossible. By a coincidence, exactly 1 year ago, I outlined a forecast of these events in one of my videos. It remains the most viewed video on my channel to this day. And even possessing this information, fully aware of the trajectory of a catastrophic scenario, I could not have imagined that in just 1 year, the situation would deteriorate so critically. Dr. Egon Cholakian has been speaking publicly about this for several years now. At the same time, the ALLATRA scientific community and the organization's volunteers have been speaking out on this issue for more than a decade. But most importantly, they did not merely talk about the problem. They identified a real practical solution that actually exists, preventing the pressure beneath Siberia from reaching a critical point by gradually, controllably, and safely releasing excess gas and lava and reducing internal pressure within the Earth. In other words, by carrying out a planned controlled degassing. In one of his videos, Dr. Egon Cholakian explained this as clearly as possible, without complex formulas, in a way that made the essence of the degassing process understandable to everyone. I will briefly remind you. Imagine an ordinary blue balloon. In this example, the balloon represents our planet, Earth. Now imagine a pump inflating that balloon. The pump represents external cosmic influence and internal processes that heat the Earth's core. As the core heats up, the mantle melts, and hot magma rises and expands in volume. You can see how the balloon grows larger. It is inflating from the inside. This is the buildup of internal pressure within the planet. And if you keep pumping air and do nothing else, at some point, the balloon will simply burst, abruptly, unexpectedly, with devastating consequences. Now imagine that the balloon is carefully pierced at a specific point using a drip system. This is what was proposed for the Siberian region, to drill numerous wells through which excess gas and lava could gradually escape. There is a roller shutter that controls the speed of air release. It is opened gently, not abruptly. The air begins to escape gradually. the pressure drops. Most importantly, the ball stops inflating so aggressively, even if the pump continues to operate. This is the essence of planned degassing. Not to stop the processes in the Earth's interior, which is impossible, but to make them safe and controllable as much as possible, preventing a catastrophic explosion. It was the only realistic way proposed to prevent disaster and save billions of lives. Yes, the method was imperfect. Yes, it involved risks. But it was the only chance that gave humanity time. It was because we have already missed that chance. As Egon Cholakian said in his video,
despite my numerous pleas to take action, it would appear that the human community has elected to ignore the window of opportunity to initiate preparatory measures for a controlled degassing of the Siberian magma plume on Russian territory. Today, I am issuing an official statement that the degassing of the Siberian plume will no longer help the situation. We have missed the opportunity in which controlled degassing could have been a viable solution. It is not the case today.
And here, it is important to dot all the I's right away. It cannot be said that people were unaware of the threat posed by the Siberian plume. It cannot be said that they had not heard about it. And it certainly cannot be said that there was no information available. Information from ALLATRA reports, as well as from Dr. Egon Cholakian's videos on this topic, was distributed worldwide. ALLATRA volunteers, along with a huge number of people concerned about this issue, were publishing videos en masse on their blogs. Countless videos and posts in different languages, articles, podcasts, interviews. Videos about a possible breach of the Siberian plume were garnering millions of views. This topic was discussed around the world. Fragments of Egon Cholakian's video appeals were watched, shared, and discussed, including by those who today pretend that nothing serious is happening, including in regions where topics raised by ALLATRA are currently banned. In Russia itself, where ALLATRA has now been declared extremist at the instigation of Alexander Dworkin's anti-cult network and his ratseers, ordinary citizens on social media raised and continue to discuss the threat of a Siberian plume breach. Even those same anti-cultists who spent more than a decade running a discrediting campaign against ALLATRA did not miss an opportunity at their conferences, anti-cult meetings, and closed chats to watch and discuss our videos. Russia, in general, clearly harbors a special, at times even unhealthy, affection for this American scientist who rang the alarm bells the loudest about the Siberian plume problem. One only has to look at the stream of publications in Russian media in 2025.
Articles appeared in which so-called experts, who were in fact mouthpieces for the anti-cult network,
tried to discredit Dr. Cholakian for a measly bite of prey, calling him artificial intelligence, a fake, and labeling information about the Siberian plume as nonsense. They even devoted airtime on federal channels during prime time to smear his reputation. And all of this despite the ban on ALLATRA international public movement in Russia. It is astonishing. They have already banned it, already driven it out, stripped it of any opportunity to conduct research and obtain data that could help address the climate problem posed by the growing threat of the Siberian plume breach. And yet, they keep talking about it. They simply cannot forget us or allow people to breathe freely. These anti-cult jackals, hungry for human suffering. Excuse me, but they're acting like an abuser in a relationship who has ruined everything, who has mocked and kicked out their partner, and now walks around, peeks at social media, and tells everyone, "My ex is so awful." They can neither forget nor let go. At the same time, and this is where the paradox becomes clear, in Russia, anti-cult activists and the media outlets affiliated with them did not ignore this topic or simply pass it by. On the contrary, they deliberately spent time, resources, and effort trying to suppress it or discredit it outright. Following the tune of Dvorkin, the self-proclaimed grand sectologist of all Rus, the issue was branded a fake, allegedly spread by the terrifying cult ALLATRA, thereby desperately trying to blind and deafen their own citizens with the very substance which Dvorkin himself prefers to serve his lovers in moments of passion. I discuss this in detail in one of my videos on the channel. Information about the Siberian plume was out in the open. It was firmly present in the information field and widely discussed at the public level. So, speaking honestly, only one conclusion is possible. We were heard, but we were not listened to. What happened to the climate in 2025? And what will happen in 2026 speaks for itself. This is not a coincidence. It's not all of a sudden. It is the direct result of decisions that were either never made or were made with full awareness of the devastating consequences they would bring. I want to clearly emphasize what the scientists and volunteers of ALLATRA actually did. Imagine not a single tragedy or localized disaster, but a massive bomb with no clearly defined timer, embedded in the foundation of the shared house in which all of humanity lives. That bomb is the Siberian magma plume, an enormous accumulation of incandescent magma, gases, and pressure that has been building for thousands of years and continues to gain energy to this day. And within this reality, there appear people who have neither power nor billion-dollar budgets, yet spend their own money and time, and quite literally, dedicate their entire lives to doing three key things. First, they identify threats on a planetary scale and call things by their proper names, not in a veiled manner, but directly. Second, they explain why this threat is real and what its consequences will be, not just for one region, but for the entire planet. And third, and this is the most important part, they propose a ready-to-use, practical solution supported by scientific data. I emphasize, supported by scientific data. This is not about maybe someday we'll invent something. This is a solution that is already used in certain fields. Planned degassing is a principle that has long been applied wherever excess pressure exists, in industry, geology, and engineering systems. ALLATRA proposed scaling an already well-known approach to the planetary level. It is impossible to stop processes in the Earth's interior, but relieving critical stress without pushing the system toward an explosion, drawing on existing experience with controlled degassing, was entirely realistic. That is where the immense value lies, because ALLATRA volunteers did not merely say, "We are all in danger," and did not just draw attention to the problem, they offered a real, effective plan for neutralizing it. Yes, it involved risks. Yes, it was complex. Yes, it required enormous effort, coordination, and responsibility. But it offered a real chance to save billions of lives. Our volunteers spoke about this, warned about it, for years, consistently, supported with evidence. ALLATRA volunteers did not start talking about this when it became fashionable or profitable. For many years, they explained what the Siberian plume is, presented data indicating its activity, outlined possible development scenarios, and proposed a concrete, practical solution: planned degassing. And this point is crucial. This was not about slogans, fantasy, or mysticism. It was about a technical, scientifically grounded approach. At the same time, other issues were raised as well. Atmospheric water generators as a solution to the threat of critical nanoplastic contamination of the biosphere, and the need for a comprehensive approach to studying processes in the atmosphere, the ocean, and the Earth's interior. So what happened? They were not listened to. And now, as Dr. Egon Cholakian has stated, degassing the Siberian plume will no longer help. There was a chance, but humanity missed it because of the greed of certain individuals who make important decisions in Russia. As a result, at their instigation, what began then continues today. Harassment, discreditation, bans, and persecution of ALLATRA by the anti-cult network. All of this amounts to a monstrous, deliberate act of killing humanity. And who is capable of such a crime? Who could so brutally destroy not only innocent people, but all of humanity, including their own family and their own children? Who enjoys knowing that a doctor who diagnosed a patient and offered a viable treatment method is silenced, expelled from the hospital, deprived of research resources and access to medicines, tortured, stigmatized, and stripped of his status as a human being by being labeled a cultist? Only a person devoid of empathy and suffering from severe psychological disorders could be the author of such acts of sadism. And one such brilliant psychopath today is personally pulling the strings of power in Russia,
whispering his directives into the ears of security services,
as well as the legislative and judicial systems. Yes, I am speaking about Alexander Dvorkin, the Russian professor, sectologist, and expert on extremism, operating through his totalitarian structure called Ratsirs, the Russian Association of Centers for the Study of Religions and Sects. In reality, he is a professor and a theologian only on the websites of his own followers. The academic community has long known his true nature. I will once again point to the video that examines in detail who this person really is and what perverse practices he carries out while hiding behind the mask of a robed reader, supposedly protecting society from terrible sects and cults. He is also brilliant in his madness because even with confirmed medical diagnoses of mental disorders, he was able to bring a huge nuclear power to its knees and make the entire ruling elite dance exclusively to his tune. As a result, Russia has embarked on a course of authoritarianism, reminiscent of the period of Stalinist repression in 1937. In essence, it is already becoming North Korea 2.0. Returning to the topic of the Siberian plume and the analogy with the doctor, in this case, the ALLATRA movement and its scientific group act as the doctor. But what happened was that certain individuals in Russia, who obviously had their own interests in the Siberian region, had become too accustomed to the jingle of gold coins in their pockets. After all, Siberia is in many ways a profitable region. It is simply a tasty morsel for people whose capital and profits directly depend on the current industry and extractive sector in the Siberian region. And for them, it was obviously unbearable that the volunteers and scientific team of ALLATRA were right in their predictions. We have repeatedly warned that disasters associated with the activation of the magmatic plume under Siberia will only increase. You can see this for yourself. As a result of the plume's influence, two powerful earthquakes with magnitudes above 7 occurred within a single week in December. First, a magnitude 7.0 quake struck along the Alaska-Yukon border. Just 2 days later, a magnitude 7.6 earthquake hit off the coast of Japan. This was not a random coincidence, but clear evidence of deep-seated processes caused by the pressure exerted by the Siberian plume on the Earth's crust. The year 2025 was marked by a series of geodynamic records and anomalies. The devastating magnitude 7.7 earthquake in Myanmar on March 28th demonstrated unprecedented characteristics. A super shear rupture extending 475 kilometers. Then, in late July, a mega-earthquake of magnitude 8.8 struck Kamchatka, accompanied by a series of anomalous aftershocks. It occurred in the marginal zone of the Eurasian plate, beneath which the Siberian plume is continuing to intensify. In a recent video address, Egon Cholakian also presented a graph based on open-source data. It shows the number of earthquakes with magnitudes of 3 and above, using data from the open internet resource Volcano Discovery, which aggregates seismic information from monitoring systems around the world. On this graph, 2025 stands out for a sharp increase in the number of earthquakes globally. The facts and figures clearly demonstrate how dramatically seismic activity on the planet has increased in recent years. ALLATRA warned openly and directly that, as the plume became more active, seismic activity along the boundaries of the Eurasian plate would intensify, and that the strongest and most anomalous events should be expected in northern Japan and in Kamchatka. That is exactly what happened. It is enough to look at recent seismic activity along the boundaries of the lithospheric plates off the coasts of Kamchatka and Japan to see clear signs of the Siberian plume's ascent. An increasing number of Russian citizens are coming to this realization and speaking about it openly. However, acknowledging the reality of the threat posed by the Siberian plume inevitably entails reputational and economic losses for those who control the country's key resources. It undermines the carefully maintained image of stability on which the state's external reputation as a reliable partner and investment destination depends. Who would invest in a region that has been officially recognized as being on the verge of a large-scale geological catastrophe? If this becomes widely acknowledged by the public, it will lead to contract revisions, increased political pressure, and a level of transparency that certain individuals who have built their fortunes on Siberia clearly did not anticipate. They realized that tomorrow they could lose their billions. And so they decided that it was far cheaper to spend hundreds of millions today to discredit the organization that openly raises this issue. Because when the truth becomes known to the majority, people begin to make decisions. They think about the safety of their families and their children. And that means a mass outflow of people from dangerous regions. This, in turn, is a direct blow to the domestic economy, the labor market, and ultimately to the personal incomes of those at the very top of the decision-making chain. The logic of those concerned about their capital, built on resource extraction in Siberia, is simple. Ban the inconvenient truth and destroy those who speak it. To implement this strategy, those seeking to preserve their wealth and power needed only convenient executors, ideally ideologically driven ones. And who could be better suited for this role than a follower of Kunith's ideology, a man who once passed prototype lists of extremists to the Nazis to facilitate the elimination of undesirable people? Alexander Dvorkin, the devoted disciple of Johannes Aagaard, who, based on numerous chains of connections, can be traced back to Nazi ideologues, and is the perfect instrument for eliminating those who stand in the way, are inconvenient, and undesirable. The network Dvorkin built is a mafia-style structure meticulously designed for such operations. A machine of terror and suppression. It contains everything necessary to neutralize those who threaten power and capital. Fanatically loyal enforcers raised on hatred and an ideology of superiority. Many of them, as if by gravitational pull, cluster around Dvorkin, united by similar manic and sadistic tendencies. Each plays a specific role. His people in the Ministry of Justice, law enforcement agencies, the judiciary, the media, and the academic community. Members of this network also operate far beyond Russia's borders. They all speak a common language of hatred, crave the infliction of suffering,
and display chronic intolerance toward democratic freedoms.
This structure also possesses a genuine weapon of terror, so-called expert evaluations, based on carefully constructed falsehoods produced by Dvorkin's distorted thinking. All it takes is to designate a target, and the machinery of repression is set in motion. Pseudo-experts, saturated with Dvorkin's writings and Nazi ideology of his mentors, are activated. Conclusions are fabricated, presented as expert commentary or formal opinions. Then comes the loud proclamation, cultist. The Ratziers puts its label, and it's done. The elimination of an organization, a religious community, a politician, an individual, or even an entire country is underway. What follows is a ban and a designation of extremism. Obedient Ratziers adherents in other countries then disseminate the necessary narratives through Dvorkin's network. And the organization that was just destroyed in Russia acquires the same reputation abroad. Naturally, all of this requires funding. For those whose trillions derived from Siberia's interior matter more than the lives of billions of people, it is clearly easier and cheaper to spend hundreds of millions on discrediting us. The goal is simple: silence us so the world does not hear the truth about the threat. That is why an entire pack of hungry jackals was hired under the guise of anti-cult fighters. Psychopaths tasked with flooding the information space with lies and distorting our work, so that no one would believe the scientific data on the Siberian plume. Dworkin structure has long been known for precisely this kind of activity. For money, it discredits innocent people and organizations, brands them, demonizes them, and destroys reputations, laying the groundwork for repression. Moreover, this is no longer limited to Russia. This conveyor belt of lies, engineered and launched by Dworkin, has long since crossed national borders and begun operating even in a number of democratic countries. The objective of this campaign is crystal clear: not merely to destroy the reputation of the ALLATRA movement and its volunteers, but to force society to reject the very scientific facts about environmental and geodynamic risks that they present. What we are facing is, in essence, a full-scale, systemic cognitive war. Not a war for territory, but a war for your minds, for your perception of reality, a war designed to keep you in ignorance. Its purpose is to make you doubt that your life is in danger, to stop you from analyzing forecasts, and to prevent you from taking facts seriously. The results of this war are already visible. Large-scale repression has been unleashed in Russia against scientists and law-abiding former ALLATRA volunteers. Many are now facing brutal persecution, some under investigation. Others have been thrown into prison. Many have lost their homes and been forced to leave the country due to constant stress and pressure from security service harassment. And that is without even mentioning the constant psychological pressure exerted by society. After all, the label cultist, much like the yellow star once imposed on Jewish people, inevitably triggers an entire chain of harassment and dehumanization. The particular cynicism of the situation lies in the fact that Ratsir's influence, despite its Russian origin, has spread into Ukraine as well. There, at the initiative of Dworkin's agents, specifically Irina Kremenovska, notorious for killing dogs, criminal cases were opened against members of the movement, based on expert opinions she knowingly falsified. Take a moment to realize this. ALLATRA volunteers in Ukraine, law-abiding citizens, many of whom are scientists, educators, and individuals engaged in activities benefiting society, people who have devoted themselves to saving human lives and strengthening the reputation and international standing of their own country, are now facing violations of their fundamental rights, intimidation, and the destruction of their lives. These volunteers spent years of their lives, their energy, their health, and their personal resources to deliver critically important information to society. And what did they receive in return?
Pressure, persecution, shattered lives, and, as a result, time lost for all of humanity.
Now, today, we can say it plainly. The window for degassing was missed because the truth was deliberately suppressed. But now this entire pack of hungry jackals, unleashed by people close to Putin, those who profit directly from Siberia, can leave ALLATRA alone and relax. Because, as Egon Cholakian said in his video,
We are leaving your Siberian plume to you,
leaving it squarely on the personal conscience of those who intentionally silence the truth. We have already missed the one and only moment when planned degassing still made sense. Everything they fought so viciously to do, suppress scientific information about the plume, discredit ALLATRA and its members, brand them as a cult, has now become completely useless and meaningless in light of the real situation. None of it affects anything anymore. Continuing this campaign would only be a waste of their money and effort. Aside from the Siberian plume, nothing currently threatens their profits. So they can go on calmly stuffing their pockets with Siberia's natural resources. At least while their Siberia and their Russia still exist. It is impossible to carry out full-scale degassing in 2 years, and we no longer have the 4 years that would have been required. Even if the world's top experts were assembled today, it would change nothing. Everything could have been different, but the time has been lost. And now that the chance for controlled degassing is gone, all that remains for us as humanity is to search for solutions in other alternative directions. Some of you who were genuinely alarmed by what I described earlier may have felt a flicker of hope and thought, are there other ways to save our lives? But don't jump to conclusions. I don't want to upset you, but I won't give you false hope either. To correct the dire situation we now find ourselves in, we face an even more complex challenge, and it is one that must be addressed collectively. It is no longer possible to shift the entire burden of the responsibility onto ALLATRA volunteers alone. The problem I am talking about requires the involvement of the entire global scientific community. Because this is no longer about a backup plan. This is about an issue that the ALLATRA scientific community has been working on for nearly 20 years. 20 years of titanic effort. And still, a complete solution has not been found. A challenge of this magnitude should have long ago brought together the world's best minds, focused on a single objective. And the time left to search for an alternative is not a window of opportunity. It is the last grains of sand in an hourglass that humanity itself has already flipped over. This is not a local threat. It is a challenge to the very continuation of life on Earth. I'm talking now about nanoplastics, the invisible killer that is systemically destroying the fragile balance of the planet's biosphere, including the body of every human being on Earth. I have raised this issue before in one of my episodes. And as I said earlier, ALLATRA has been studying it for almost 20 years. At this point, you may be confused. Just moments ago, we were talking about the global threat posed by a massive magma reservoir beneath Siberia, capable of wiping out an entire country, a continent, and eventually all life. And suddenly, we are talking about plastic? Yet this issue is directly connected to both the Siberian plume and climate change.
Still, familiar mental associations likely kick in: garbage dumps, turtles tangled in plastic waste, eco-activists.
But I'm not going to talk about reusable cups or waste sorting. And this is not about seals with plastic bags in their stomachs. This is about you. About your increasingly frequent headaches, your unexplained chronic fatigue, the worsening of autoimmune diseases. It is about your children, their hyperactivity, weakened immune systems, delayed cognitive development, and a long list of chronic conditions. Take a breath right now. You have just inhaled at least dozens of plastic nanoparticles that enter your bloodstream and eventually your cells. With every breath, more of these particles enter your body, and their number keeps growing. Take a sip of water, even from the most expensive bottle. You are literally drinking a cocktail of polymers. Every breakfast, lunch, and dinner delivers another dose of micro and nanoplastics. And your immune system cannot even recognize these particles as an enemy, meaning it cannot protect your body from them. Particle by particle, nanoplastics settle in your organs, accumulate in your stomach, in the tissues of your lungs that just inhaled them. Most frightening of all, they cross the blood-brain barrier and damage neurons in your brain. They interfere with mitochondrial function, the tiny power plants of your cells, and embed themselves at the very core of biological code, in DNA itself, causing disruptions whose full consequences we are not yet able to comprehend. There is no detox procedure for this invasion of your body. There is no cleansing. Nanoplastic particles hardly break down and are barely excreted from the body at all. Even so, all this may still sound like something very distant to you. So listen carefully now. Plastic is no longer just inside you. Nanoplastic particles are already inside those who have not yet taken their first breath. They cross the placental barrier, which is supposed to protect the fetus. But for nanoplastics, it is just another permeable layer.
Right now, in the wombs of mothers awaiting the birth of their children with hope and joy,
embryos are forming that are already poisoned by the legacy of our plastic civilization. On December 7th, 2025, the ALLATRA Global Research Center premiered the documentary Nanoplastics: Threat to Life. It brings together thousands of facts, the work of leading scientists, first-hand evidence, and research that collectively form a single, deeply alarming picture. The film clearly and comprehensively reveals what global science is only beginning to say out loud. Nanoplastics are destroying the biosphere, human health, and our future far more profoundly than most are willing to admit. In the film, Dr. Ragusa from Italy, who was the first to detect microplastics in the human placenta, shared another disturbing fact. A generation of children is already emerging whose bodies consist of both organic and inorganic materials such as plastic. These children have been called cyborg babies. They are smaller in size and, as a rule, have smaller brains than typical children. When you put together everything the data is showing today, an extremely alarming picture emerges. We are no longer talking about isolated risks or local health issues. Under the influence of nanoplastics, large-scale trends are taking shape that affect the most fundamental functions of humans as a biological species. The first trend is the loss of cognitive abilities. The second is damage to the reproductive system. What does this mean? As for the first, forgive my bluntness, but I will say it plainly. We are getting dumber, globally. Declining cognitive capacity and inability to concentrate, forgetfulness, emotional instability. All of this is the result of charged plastic nanoparticles penetrating the brain and neural networks and disrupting the most delicate electrochemical processes that underlie our ability to think. Neurons spend up to 70% of their energy transmitting nerve impulses. When their mitochondria are damaged, at a minimum, you begin to forget words, process information more slowly, and feel constant fatigue. Worse still, this can lead to neurodegenerative diseases. Already, based on a large body of data, it is clear that we are witnessing a gradual shutdown of the very capacity for complex thinking.
The ability to analyze, to create, everything that made us the dominant species is beginning to erode.
We risk becoming a species that is technologically advanced, but biologically loses the mental clarity required to solve the problems it has created itself. As for the second fundamental human function, reproduction, it is also becoming a target for nanoplastics. Fertility is declining for a reason. Charged nanoparticles of plastic can physically disrupt the functioning of sex cells and penetrate embryos. Their entry into sex cells and reproductive organ tissue is a direct path to biological infertility. For decades, the prevailing belief in the scientific community was that nanoplastics are passive materials,
and that the main danger of plastics lies in their chemical composition.
For example, toxic additives, such as phthalates or bisphenol A. Plastic was thought to be mechanically present in the body but incapable of actively interfering with biological processes. However, modern research and laboratory experiments over recent years have demonstrated a fundamentally different mechanism of impact. Nanoplastics turned out to be far from inert. Their key property is the ability to accumulate electrostatic charge on their surface. This is precisely what turns them into active, destructive agents. Once inside the body, these particles interact with cells and molecular structures not as inert grains of sand, but as energy-active objects. They interfere with intercellular signaling, disrupt electrochemical processes, distort the functioning of membranes and protein structures. In other words, they interfere with the very language through which the body communicates within itself. It is important to emphasize that for the ALLATRA scientific group, this was not a recent discovery. They knew nearly 20 years ago that micro and nanoplastics are not inert. Moreover, it was already clear then that the primary danger of nanoplastics lies precisely in their ability to retain electrostatic charge over long periods. This charge allows nanoplastic particles to interfere with the fundamental electrical processes of living organisms. And it is electrical impulses that form the basis of functioning of cells, neurons, muscles, the heart, and the nervous system. By disrupting them, nanoplastics strike at the foundation, the very mechanism of life itself. By their nature, nanoplastics in the body begin to behave like electrodes, materials capable of retaining electrostatic charge for an extremely long time. In essence, this is an electrostatic analog of a magnet, only embedded directly into living tissue. And this magnet constantly distorts normal signals, disrupts communication between cells, and interrupts natural biological processes. In short, the biosphere and we, along with our children, are already contaminated with micro and nanoplastics. Plastic particles are found in air, water, food, and the human body, regardless of where one lives. Micro and nanoplastics have destructive impact on human health and lead to inflammation, DNA damage and mutations, disruptions of the hormonal system, accelerated cellular aging, impaired cognitive function, erectile dysfunction and infertility, and an increase in cancer rates. Micro and nanoplastics affect children right from the prenatal period and continue after birth. Micro and nanoplastics also affect the climate. Plastic particles contribute to the accelerated ocean warming, atmospheric anomalies, and disruption of the hydrological cycle.
Thus, we are facing a global problem that simultaneously threatens human health,
biodiversity, and the planet's climatic stability. While humanity still has neither effective methods for cleaning the environment of micro and nanoplastics, nor ways to stop them from entering living organisms, we are only just beginning to grasp the true scale of this disaster. You may ask if the ALLATRA scientific group has been studying the impact of nanoplastics on the human body and the entire biosphere for decades. Why is there still no ready-made solution? The answer is brutally honest and free from illusions, because this is one of the most complex challenges in modern science. It is a task that requires an interdisciplinary approach, enormous resources, and the involvement of the best minds in the world: physicists, biologists, physicians, engineers, material scientists, and neuroscientists. And perhaps, if over the past decade the work of the ALLATRA scientific group had not been systemically discredited, if Dworkin's network had not built an endless stream of information attacks and blocked every attempt to convey scientific data, the situation today might look very different. Perhaps by now the world's leading scientists would already have been working on a concrete solution to the nanoplastic threat. ALLATRA scientists did what no one before them had done. They did not merely advance research in this field. They identified the source of the threat.
and most importantly, they were the first to identify the direction in which it is actually possible to seek a solution.
If the source of the damage is the electret-like behavior of nanoplastics, then the root of the problem lies in their electrostatic charge. This means the key task is to deprive nanoplastics of their ability to accumulate and retain electrostatic charge, to make them truly inert. In theory, this sounds almost simple. In practice, it is one of the most difficult challenges humanity has ever faced. Because it's not about new material or future technologies. We are talking about nanoplastics that already exist everywhere. In the air we breathe, the water we drink, the soil that grows in our food, in our bodies, tissues, organs, and even the bodies of unborn children. And here a very simple, almost naive question arises. How exactly do we plan to change the properties of something that is already everywhere and in everything? This is not an engineering problem. It's not a startup idea. It's not a green initiative that can be neatly packaged into a presentation. This is a challenge of an entirely different scale.
That is why today, the discussion about nanoplastics is no longer a discussion about environmental comfort or quality of life.
What is at stake is not convenience. What is at stake is the continuation of life itself. When it comes to the tremendous contribution that ALLATRA scientists have made to the study of climate change and the problem of biosphere pollution with nanoplastics, they have not only identified the main danger posed by plastic nanoparticles,
but have also explored the possibility of cleaning the biosphere of plastic.
At one point, a method was proposed that could reduce the concentration of micro and nanoplastics and buy humanity a significant amount of time. I'm referring to the large-scale global deployment of AWG systems, atmospheric water generators. The global application of this technology would have accelerated evaporation from the oceans, which in turn would have helped clean both the water and the atmosphere of micro and nanoplastics by intensifying the atmospheric water cycle and increasing evaporation. Cool ocean waters, and consequently, cool the lithospheric plates beneath them. Moreover, it would have had a direct impact on the planet's climate situation. Historically, the ocean has been Earth's key temperature regulator. It absorbed excess heat, redistributed energy, and smoothed out climate extremes. The ocean's ability to dissipate excess heat is what allowed the planet to remain habitable. But today, this function is critically impaired. Micro and nanoplastics that now fill the oceans disrupt their ability to perform this cooling role. Plastic particles alter the properties of water, disrupt heat exchange processes, and distort the planet's natural cooling mechanisms.
This means that Earth's climate system is losing one of its primary stabilizing elements.
And here, it is vital to connect everything I have discussed thus far.
The threat of a Siberian magma plume breach,
rapid climate change, and catastrophic nanoplastic pollution of the oceans are not three separate problems. They are one interconnected process. The initial heating of the ocean is caused by rising magma, which has particularly strong effect on the oceanic crust, which is thinner and more vulnerable than continental crust. Magma rises as a result of excess energy entering the Earth's core from space. As plastic waste breaks down into micro and nanoparticles, the thermal conductivity of seawater decreases, hindering the dissipation of excess heat from the Earth's interior through the ocean. This leads to the accumulation of excess energy within the planet, resulting in an increase in deep focus earthquakes, the rapid formation of new magma plumes, and the reactivation of old ones. And these are the processes we are witnessing today. In turn, these processes further destabilize the planet and accelerate ocean warming. A dangerous feedback loop is forming. Geodynamic activity heats the ocean. Ocean warming accelerates plastic breakdown. Rising microplastic concentrations reduce water's thermal conductivity. Heat dissipation from the Earth's interior is disrupted. Geodynamic activity and earthquake frequency increase. The ocean heats up even more, further accelerating the breakdown of plastic into micro and nanoparticles. It is precisely this feedback loop that is driving the sharp increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events today. Devastating floods, hurricanes, tropical cyclones, and heat anomalies. You have surely begun to see these images in the news with frightening regularity. And if we add to all of this the magma bomb beneath Siberia, a simple question arises. In light of this, all these anti-cold persecutions, political squabbles, geopolitical games, and struggles for the spheres of influence, so obsessively pursued by part of humanity blinded by the thirst for power and accumulation of wealth, don't they look completely meaningless? It is tragic that we missed yet another opportunity to buy ourselves time. The AWG method, atmospheric water generators, could have become a tool to mitigate several threats at once. We could have cleaned the ocean. We could have partially cleaned the atmosphere. We could have slowed the destructive processes. But this didn't happen. Instead, there was another round of howling from the rabid anti-cult dogs, who, with foam at the mouth, branded ALLATRA a cult, dismissed our ideas as pseudoscience, conspiracy theory, a fake, and labeled ALLATRA volunteers who were trying to convey the truth to the public as alarmists. Members of the anti-cult network did everything possible to ensure this proposal, too, went unheard. They said this is pseudoscience. Fine. Then I have a simple question. Did we invent seismology? Did we invent the warming of Siberia and the oceans? Did we invent rising seismic activity, the melting of the permafrost, the anomalous weather conditions and temperature records? A huge number of people simply repeated these claims, either blindly or even knowingly, without bothering to analyze the facts, understand the situation, or ask the basic question, what is ALLATRA? And what are they actually saying? Now everything has fallen into place. Today, people are seeing it for themselves. Kamchatka, Japan, the climatic and geodynamic processes in Siberia, melting permafrost, destruction, and rising seismic activity. Everyone is starting to realize we were right. In private conversations, messages, even in places where all of this is officially banned, the same words are being repeated. Cholakian was right. ALLATRA was right. The entire world can now see what ALLATRA truly is, how accurate our forecasts were, and just how detailed and consistent our descriptions of the processes now unfolding in reality have proven to be. Over decades of climate modeling, only one model has shown the closest match to what is actually happening: the ALLATRA model. The authors of other climate models have already been forced to admit that their calculations no longer work, that their forecasts are outdated, and that they fail to explain reality. Which means the question of who is actually promoting pseudoscience is no longer rhetorical. The answer is being given by the planet itself, and that is the most frightening confirmation possible. The concentration of micro and nanoplastics in the ocean and in the atmosphere has reached a point of no return, a threshold beyond which a technology that for many years was proposed as a means of salvation would now become an accelerator of catastrophe. If mass water evaporation were launched today using atmospheric water generators, AWGs, the operation of these systems would lead to an even more intense transfer of micro and nanoplastic particles from the ocean into the atmosphere. Instead of cleaning the planet, we would get the opposite result. Earth would turn into a sealed chamber of oversaturated with electrically charged plastic particles, and therefore would heat up even faster. Moreover, this would cause a sharp, exponential spike in the concentration of nanoplastics in the air we breathe every second. The consequences are inevitable: accelerated deterioration of human health, widespread damage to the respiratory, nervous, and reproductive systems, and the rapid approach to the point beyond which the future of humanity as a biological species is no longer a given.
What could have once been our lifeline today would become a detonator.
And this is a direct consequence of lost time. So, we can state the following. We are not merely observing a disturbing trend. This is a tragic pattern that has already manifested itself twice before our eyes. We have two stark, painfully obvious examples of how effective working technologies, when not applied in time, turned from tools of salvation into their complete opposite. Those technologies are atmospheric water generators and the planned degassing of the Siberian magma plume. Two solutions, two chances. Twice, humanity could have delayed the inevitable. And twice, those chances were missed. We were not listened to. And now, here it is, the third chance. The one that seemed like it should no longer exist after two missed opportunities. A chance to solve the problem of nanoplastics. A killer that operates quietly, invisibly, but inevitably. In this matter, ALLATRA has already accomplished one of the key tasks of any scientific research. We have established the cause. Yes, the final solution hasn't yet been found. However, the root cause has been identified. This alone has saved the global scientific community decades of work and enormous resources. The fundamental solution to this problem must focus on depriving nanoplastic particles of their ability to accumulate and retain electrostatic charge. In simple terms, making them safe. We must turn a dangerous agent into inert dust. If we succeed in doing this, natural self-restoration mechanisms will kick in. By neutralizing the charge of micro and nanoplastics, we will not only eliminate their destructive impact on human health,
but also remove excess energy from the biosphere.
Energy that would otherwise continue to accumulate, aggravating the geodynamic crisis and intensifying natural disasters. Heat exchange in the atmosphere and in the ocean would begin to normalize. Excess heat from the Earth's interior would once again be able to dissipate into space. The ocean and the atmosphere would start returning to a state of equilibrium. If that happens, there is a chance that the magma plume beneath Siberia, cooling naturally due to the restored temperature balance, will not explode. But this would only be possible if the experimental equipment of ALLATRA scientists, equipment that functioned flawlessly for 10 years and proved its effectiveness, is restored in the territory above the Siberian plume. Yet today, this plan sounds more like science fiction than a realistic scenario. Because the anti-cult network, led by Dworkin, protecting those who obviously feed their bloodthirsty jackal muzzles, did everything to ensure ALLATRA cannot obtain data from the territory above the magmatic plume.
Data that are critically necessary to address all of the threats described above.
As of today, the branding of the organization as extremist, a signature tactic of Alexander Dworkin and his Ratshear's organization, has made this scenario impossible. We have found ourselves in a situation that can only be described as a dead end. This is the extreme point of a catastrophe created not by us, but by those who allowed anti-cult propaganda to be fed not only to the public, but also to those responsible for making global state-level decisions. It turned out to be easier for them to destroy ALLATRA than to risk their capitals. But tell me, what use is their money if tomorrow plastic destroys their brains? If they can no longer recognize their children or grandchildren, for whom are they accumulating these fortunes if there will be no one to pass them on to? Because even reproduction will no longer be possible. The time to implement atmospheric water generators has already been lost. The time for planned degassing of the Siberian plume has been lost as well. And now, the only rational path that still remains for humanity is to find a solution to neutralize micro and nanoplastics.
But this search must begin not in a year, it must begin immediately.
The real difficulty lies here. With the Siberian plume, we had a clear plan, a roadmap, a concrete strategy that required only a green light and a start signal. Here, however, we are facing a threat for which there is currently no ready-to-use solution. And we must acknowledge this honestly. Today, there is no technology in the world capable of neutralizing nanoplastics and stripping them of their electrolyte behavior. There is no device that can prevent their penetration into the bloodstream or the womb. There is no method that can pull humanity out of this trap. But it is critically important to find one. Nanoplastic particles must be deprived of their ability to accumulate and retain electrostatic charge. This is the foundation. This is the starting point. This is the guiding principle that must form the basis of the global scientific community's work. Everything else is merely dealing with consequences. This is about addressing the cause. ALLATRA has identified the primary cause of the nanoplastic-related catastrophe. It is clear. It is logical. It can be verified through experimental research. For the scientific community to genuinely begin searching for a solution, only one thing is required: a unified vector aimed at depriving nanoplastics of their ability to retain electrostatic charge. Today, there are not enough fully equipped laboratories in the world designed specifically for nanoplastic research. The equipment itself is often beyond the reach of individual research centers.
The cost of a Raman microscope capable of detecting the smallest nanoplastic particles can reach $500,000, and that is just one instrument.
Now imagine how many of them would be needed to study nanoplastics throughout the entire biosphere. And that's not all. X-ray machines, dispensers, magnetometers, electromagnetic field systems are also required. Laboratories are needed where experiments with radioactive materials can be conducted. Where to get all this? Everything already exists. The equipment exists. The infrastructure is already in place all over the world. Specialists exist as well, along with people capable of clear, analytical thinking. What is needed are conditions: a single scientific center, coordination, and data sharing for a joint effort focused on one clearly defined task. The number of experiments required to find a solution will be enormous. Because for the first time, we are facing a challenge that requires changing the properties of a substance across the entire biosphere of the planet. Not locally, not just in the human body, not only in the ocean or the air, but everywhere. Of course, this requires cooperation and collaboration from the global community, including governments and decision-makers. Open collaboration based solely on transparent data exchange. To create the necessary conditions for the scientific community, grants and funding are also required. But how can we get this process moving? Right now, there is only one thing we need to do: create conditions that will allow scientists worldwide to work on finding a solution. We already have such an example: the decoding of human DNA, also known as the Human Genome Project. It was one of the most ambitious scientific endeavors in history and was successfully completed thanks to the unprecedented international cooperation. The Human Genome Project was carried out as an open, public initiative that united thousands of researchers worldwide. This was a deliberate decision to prevent genetic information from becoming private property. More than 20 universities and research centers from 6 countries participated, forming the International Human Genome Sequencing Consortium. A key factor in the project's success and openness was the adoption of the so-called Bermuda Principles in 1996, which required that all DNA sequence data obtained under the project be published in publicly accessible databases within 24 hours. So if humanity already has experience with international scientific collaboration around a single shared goal, why can't we apply it again in the case of nanoplastics? All that is needed is a unified database, open access to research, grants, funding, laboratories, equipment, and, most importantly, political will. Yes, it may require abandoning certain developments, including new weapons programs. But what is the point of wars if humanity is facing extinction? We do not have time for hesitation. We cannot afford to wait until cognitive abilities disappear, until our intelligence degrades to a level of a simple eat and survive reflex. Otherwise, the zombie apocalypse scenarios that Hollywood has been scaremongering about will cease to be fiction. The only true driving force behind finding a solution is people themselves, which means it is time to grow up.
Time to stop waiting for someone else to come and fix everything. When you are sick, the doctor only finds out about it because you came to them and demanded treatment. But now we are all sick.
And if we don't demand a solution, how are we ever going to get better? And although, as a civilization, we have exhausted our margin for error, I will say the most important thing: everything can still be changed. And the future can still be given a chance. Only one thing is required for this: for humanity to finally become humanity. We must make it possible for scientists from different countries to work together to find a way to deprive plastic nanoparticles of electric-like behavior and to create conditions for their work. Yes, this will require enormous funding. Yes, it will involve thousands of scientists and hundreds of laboratories. But let's be honest. What's the alternative? A new planet? A ship for resettlement? Tickets to Mars? None of us has a second heart or a second brain. There is no second biosphere. There is no second Earth. There is only us. And only what we do now.
If we have the will,
The intelligence, and the courage to acknowledge our mistakes, we can still change this story. If not, we will write the final page in the history of the human species ourselves. And that page will begin with the words, "They knew, they were warned, and they did nothing." As long as we are still capable of thinking, as long as our brains have not yet been destroyed by plastic, as long as we can speak, understand, and act, we are obligated to fight for our future and the future of our children, and to seize this chance.